Paul. We'll continue a little bit with philosophy, but we also invited Tobias Cheung to this panel, not only for his brilliant positions about the philosophy of science, especially biological science and the organism, but also because he has a kind of tribal cultural background. So also between the Chinese culture, the Japanese culture, and of course the German culture. I give it up. I was trying to find back how I wanted to present you, because I cannot really learn by heart the titles of his books. I mean, Tobias Cheung is a professor at the for the history of knowledge and culture at the Institute of Cultural History and Theory at the Humboldt University, and you have written books such as The Organization of the Living, the roles of Cuvier's, Leibniz, and Kant's notions of organismic order in the history of biology, about Charles Bonnet's system theory and philosophy of organic order, and then most prominently Ray Vivens' agent models of organic order from 1600 to 1800. So, of course, you have seen the exhibition as well, and I think that you also helped us a lot, and you helped the artist a lot in validating in a certain way that the very name of the machine, Sensei Ichigo, makes sense. So maybe you can combine your philosophical insight also with some side aspects that you are seeing in this exhibition that you have been attending last week, the opening.
Thanks very much also for the invitation, especially for this wonderful installation. I'll stand, I have to move a bit and the lights are terrible. Is there, where is this remote device?
It's a bit aggressive, so you need to be really, it jumps around.
I just turn it on, turn it off again. And, this is the last page, just a moment. Is that okay? We see, okay. So when we see Cohen's and Van Balen's installations, supposedly most of us have some kind of uncomfortable feeling. It would be misleading to refer to this reaction as a kind of an instinct, like a rabbit that sees an eagle in the sky and runs away. Rather, the reaction is embedded within the historical sediments and dynamics of a wide cultural context. Today, I will focus on this context and have a closer look at the installation Sterile. We see the fish. In the long-term history of the rationalization and experimentalization of living objects, reproduction became, at least in the 18th century, the main specific and at the same time constituting property of organic bodies. Reproduction referred to many processes: the reproduction of lost parts and arms, tails and heads, the reproduction of parts in physiological and later on metabolic processes, the reproduction of health as an equilibrium of bodily states, and most important, the reproduction of myself in another self, thus the generation of new living beings. In Cohen's and Van Toor's installation, we see a machine that reproduces non-reproductive living beings. Like a magic device, the machine seems to represent what the living being substantially is. That is to say, a reproductive processual entity, and yet it really is only a machine and not a natural organism that produces this being as a reproducible thing. I think that Cohen's and Van Balen's installation evokes this ambivalent feeling in us. Sterile seems to be both a machine and a living thing. It thus provokes the question, what is the difference between both entities? The machine seems to say life is reproduction and I can reproduce reproduction. Further on, the machine does not only reproduce a basic property of living things, it also eliminates this property in the living thing that it produces. The produced living thing is not reproductive, it is sterile. Through this theft, we become aware of the danger that the machine represents or could represent. First of all, the machine seems to neglect our feelings to be unique. Standardized and reproduced as an egg and sperm producing thing, we lose our status as a unique individual, something that only exists one time in the world, something that has the right to express itself because its viewpoint, your viewpoint, my viewpoint, is different from all the others, and the singularity should not be suppressed. Each viewpoint is unique, and it is part of an essential and non-reducible plurality of this world. Secondly, the machine does not only reproduce us, it actually also controls us as reproduced and standardized objects. It can steal some of our properties, and it actually already stole one of our most basic properties, the one that defines us as living beings, the property of reproduction. Cohen's and Van Balen's installation thus point to two general problems of modernity that have been discussed by Herbert Marcuse and Jürgen Habermas amply. First, the relation between humanistic values, or democratic values if you would like to emphasize this aspect, and technology, or to use a different jargon, between individuality and standardization. Does it make sense to speak of a technical humanism or of a techno-humanism? Second, the relation between science and control. This problem would lead us into a discussion about the self-reflexivity of science. That is to say, to a discussion about the critical potential of science that would distinguish it from ideology. If science can control humans like machines, why should we not use this rationalizing potential in all aspects of human life? Besides these two problems, Cohen's and Van Balen's installation, a machine that seems to say life is reproduction and I can reproduce this reproduction, and a machine that finally eliminates this property in the living that it produces, still points to another aspect that is related to our uncomfortable, ambivalent feeling when we see this installation. This aspect could be categorized in the section the production of values in larger cultural contexts. To refer to this aspect, I will tell you a short story. In this story, the identity theft of Cohen's and Van Balen's machine already happened a long time ago. It actually happened when humans began to replace a special property of gods, that is, the faculty of creation, through scenarios of conditioned material settings in the second half of the 17th century. We heard about it. And these scenarios could be translated into technical installations. We all know this story. It is a story that first culminated in the period of Enlightenment under the banner of the so-called French ideologists, such as Destutt de Tracy and Georges Cabanis. But why is this story related to the problem of reproduction? Because reproduction is, in this story, and in a divine perspective, nothing else than creation. The faculty to reduplicate myself into something else that is yet me. In this story, God created the world and its manifold things, and the world is a mirror of what God is. It represents God who reproduced himself in producing the world. Reproduction is the very process that produces plurality in unity and unity in plurality. Within the same perspective, reproduction is related to power, because the main property of God is their power or is his power to create something through a process of reproduction that produces plurality and unity. That is to actualize his potential in the things and worlds that he produces. As a special gift, we possess in this story the same divine power, although we cannot simply create worlds. And as it goes with presence, we are somehow very proud of it. We think that this is something that we should defend, something that represents a basic value for us. As you see, with this story, we end up again within the arena of the problems that exist between humanistic values and technology, or individuality and standardization, science, democracy, and control. I will not enlarge the consequences of these aspects and leave it to the discussion to get more closely to it. And in the last minutes, I will, to give some further points of interest into the installation, 3 perspectives on the machine-organism relation, and I will try to start this. The fish is nice, but let's go to some writing systems. I think I'll leave this tool to your fragile sentiment. It's better than pushing it. Oh, yeah. Okay, so 3 aspects that I will discuss for the machine-organism relation, like projection, fusion, and replacement. So, next one, please. I will use a methodological grid with 5 elements: a purpose, that is to say, what role played that organism-machine relation in a certain historical cultural context. I have main players. I have a structure of the interface as a kind of a characterization of it. A role of the interface, I will say something more about the purpose. And finally, some thoughts about the formal aspect of the organism-machine difference. So the first one, projection. There you have the purpose in the historical cultural context, machines as tools. Oh no, I was too quick. You cannot see it. Machines as tools and you can. Machines as tools and artificial organs for living beings. This is a kind of a reversal of the Cartesian aspect that we use actually machines to explain the organic beings. No, organic beings are used to explain the existence of machines. Our players are people you probably know, like August Kölle, Ernst Kapp, who wrote Philosophies of Technology, Paul Alsberg and Arnold Gehlen in the Philosophical Anthropology. These are the main players. The role of the interface, the structure of the interface is living beings use machines like organs. And the role of the interface is living beings need tools for their survival. And especially for humans, the reason for the need of machines is also the reason for the evolution, non-specification, flexibility, adaptability of their bodies. And the organism-machine difference, then organs functions as inbuilt machines. Machines are the projection of natural organs. Also, living beings as agents seem not to be reducible to machines. In many of these positions, historical positions, people think that organisms still have something like a life force, a soul, if it refers to humans especially, or a spirit. So this is a basic first aspect of the projection. There you have it once again. I know it's very quick, but we do not have so much time, and we could go back to it later on if you want to. The next one is fusion. In the fusion, you have a different purpose, design of the coexistence of machines and living beings. And the main players are somebody called Friedrich Kiesler and a Japanese architect, Kisho Kurokawa. And the structure of the interface is living beings exist in machine environments. So this is a kind of a fact. They do not put this fact into an evolutionary scheme as the other ones. They just realize that's how history ended up, and we have to pragmatically work with it. The role of the interface is improving the economy and quality of life worlds, and the special focus is on big cities, urban landscapes, humans and buildings, households, transportation. I have some examples of Kiesler and of Kurokawa. Kiesler was an Austrian architect who went to New York and there opened the first laboratory for design correlation at the Columbia University. And in his book Correalism and Biotechnique, he developed a scheme of three spheres: the human sphere, the technical sphere, and the natural sphere. And the interaction of these spheres creates the conditio humana. And the second one, Kurokawa, is also an architect and an urban designer. He is attached to the avant-garde movement in the 1960s in Japan. The name of the movement is the Metabolists, and he created a plan for Tokyo and used DNA helix structures to superpose these structures on the old city landscape and make a kind of a fusion between organic architecture and the existing architecture. Okay, so, and from this point we come to the last aspect of it. Okay, I still have these organism-machine differences, so it's not clear here, it's not clearly defined, possible replacement, but prevailing images of a happy coexistence with the presence of both humans and machines. The last historical aspect I wanted to focus on after fusion is replacement. And in the replacement section, we have a purpose that could be defined such as the optimization of economic production processes. As main players, we have here Henry Ford, already mentioned, and Charles Sheeler. The role of the structure of the interface: living beings are replaced by machines. And the role of the interface, there we have improving the economy of societies and nations, economic orders based on scientific knowledge of productivity and profit, productivity as a measure for the value of agents, machines, bodies, societies, nations, and a special focus on production sites. And this somehow leads over to the example of Charles Sheeler. Charles Sheeler was hired by Ford when he constructed a new construction site at the Rouge River next to Detroit in 1927. And he was hired to photograph the production site. And in Sheeler's images, you have big, huge machines, you have landscapes without humans, and images that express a kind of ambivalent feeling of the glory of technology and the terrifying aspect of it, because there is no living being in these pictures. So he made a whole series of it, and the next one is a picture from within the production side of Ford and his new A model. On the last picture is the stamping machine, as he called it, that seems to eat the worker who somehow feeds it with some things. So there you have the kind of ambivalent feeling about the machine that somehow eats its own producer and is reproducing what it eats. This is basically a very quick, and I know very, after all what has already been said, you must be very fed up with all the things that you heard. But for the sake of time, I thought I'd make it a little bit quicker and come to my short final remarks. So the cultural perspective of projection and fusion still leave room for an ontology of distance and difference between organisms and machines, including humans. However, if we look at the current developments, these perspectives seems to be absorbed by the last perspective, the perspective of replacement. If we look at the problem of replacement from an East Asian cultural sphere, in which the installations have been produced, as you mentioned, we cannot, however, simply reuse the organism-machine context, the Western context. Let me just mention one historical incident to point to the possibility of a different viewpoint. In Japan of the Meiji period, after 1870 and the forced opening of the countries to Western forces and technologies, there has been an intense Japanese debate about the organism-machine relation on the basis of Western concepts. Around 1900, the westernization of Japan already came so far that a kind of a counter-movement emerged, a movement that tried to establish a new cultural foundation of the Japanese self-identity, for example, a proper religion like the Shintoism. Within this counter-movement, a professor of medicine and physiology at Tokyo University in the 1920s, Hashida Kunihiko, tried to develop a new metaphysics of the self with relation to the new experimental physiology he taught at the university. Based on Dojin's book Shobo Genzo, he combined a kind of Buddhistic processual ontology of the self, in which the logic of the transformation of the self represented its identity, with the organismic identity produced through metabolic processes. In this construction, the organismic identity would be only one possible form of the existence of the Buddhistic self. The Buddhistic self has no proper form, no proper material form. So there would be no conflict if this kind of identity would take the form of a metabolic machine with the faculty of reproduction. Such a viewpoint would also fit with the worldview of the Japanese architect Kisho Kurokawa. That's basically my contribution.